each of the participants here how your world has changed and gone more virtual, there'd be agreement that everything's virtual. And when things are virtual, there is more of a need for accessibility. So that's going to be a theme throughout. I have my website up here, which is lflegal.com. I have my Twitter, which is @lflegal. For those of you not yet on Twitter or on Twitter but not following the digital accessibility space, I really recommend it. There's a lot of great information. People share a lot of good things. There's an accessibility hashtag, which is hashtag A11Y, for the 11 letters between A and Y in accessibility. So it's a great source of information around the accessibility space. I always put the legal stuff that I learn of up there right away. So I really recommend it. And one other thing about the title slide, you see I have my Twitter is LF Legal, my website is LF Legal, and I just want to give a short story, which is another theme of this presentation, which is the reason that I have LF Legal, which, you know, I work for myself. I never thought I needed a brand. I never planned to have a brand, but when I was putting up my website, a blind friend of mine said to me, I was going to be LaineyFeingold.com, and he said, no one will spell Lainey, no one knows how to spell Feingold, and your website address will not fit on a single line of Braille on your business card. And he said, why don't you be LF Legal? Those are your initials. And it's almost like become my name. People think the name of my firm is LF Legal. And it was all because I listened to a friend with a disability. And that is another theme. People can stay out of legal trouble if you listen to your customers and your employees who have disabilities, who are disabled. So yeah, notes on this presentation, a couple quick things. I will be interchangeably using disabled people and people with disabilities, and that's because the disability community has people who prefer one over the other. And again, when you're dealing one-on-one with someone, with your customers, with your employees, of course you listen to what their preference is. When you're doing a talk like this, and I can't poll everybody in the audience, I'll use them interchangeably. And another preliminary rule is that nothing here will be legal advice. I have a big X over the word legal advice. I do these presentations because I think it's so important for all of us, in whatever role you're in, to be able to talk about the law without fear, as a motivator for doing things right, but not the only motivator, not the primary driver. So this is public information and shareable information, but not legal advice. So why is the law part of digital accessibility? Why are we even talking about the law in a summit like today? The reason is that accessibility is a civil right of disabled people. And I have this illustrated. If you've ever seen one of my talks, I always use this slide. Usually I like to mix up the slides. I always use this one because it's a march in the run-up to the Americans with Disabilities Act. Disabled people are protesting in the street with a big sign, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," Martin Luther King. And it's a reminder to me and to you that the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is going to turn 30 this July, isn't just a set of random imposition on your businesses. It is the result of actions and organizing by the disability community for years, for decades, to be included in society. And so accessibility, digital accessibility, is a civil right. And the reason is because accessibility is about participation. You wouldn't be at the summit. You're already a champion if you are here today, if you're listening to this talk, because you know that if your documents aren't accessible, if your website, if your email, if your social media posts aren't accessible, then people with disabilities are going to be left out. There will not be participation. Information could never be more important than it is today. I put up a picture here of a face mask with instructions how to use it, you know, how to do the ties behind the ear, make sure it fits snugly. The information that is coming out today on websites and media of all sorts, and emails and newsletters and whatever you're using to communicate, is not just about business anymore. It's also about safety and health. So accessibility has never been more important, and the civil rights aspects have never been clearer. Also, security and privacy. And again, I put the picture of the close-up of the coronavirus because health is a matter of security and privacy, but also everything that you are doing as communicators. Uh, you're probably working for an organization that really gets the value of security and privacy, and you may have to be advocating more for accessibility. Accessibility is security and privacy. If a person with a disability cannot independently access the information that you are putting out, security and privacy is broken. So if you have a security department and you need to get more funding for accessibility, if a disabled person can't use their credit card, can't buy, can't get their medical information, everything that we do on the web that we want to do independently, if it's not accessible, it's not secure and private. So this is why we say accessibility is a civil right. And it's not just a random idea. It's something that is baked into the laws of the United States, individual states, and increasingly around the world. So just really quick, some of those laws that support digital accessibility. The Americans with Disabilities Act, which since the beginning has said that organizations, public, private, education, government, must effectively communicate with the people they serve. And effective communication is accessible documents, accessible websites, emails that everybody can read. So while the web was not around when the ADA was passed 30 years ago, the ADA has always said effective communication. The only way you can effectively communicate web content is with digital accessibility, is with PDFs that are properly tagged and marked up. So the ideas are 30 years old. The application is keeping up as was intended with what society is offering. Section 508, if you're selling to the federal government, you know everything has to be accessible. Section 504, if you're receiving from the federal government, the law is really quite simple. If you're getting money from the federal government, you can't pick and choose who to spend it on. And if you're putting out information that's not accessible, you're choosing not to spend the federal money that's supporting that information on people with disabilities. The Affordable Care Act has a provision, section 1557, about the importance of non-discrimination in healthcare, and not having accessible information is an example of discrimination. We have laws in all 50 states, well, not all 50 states, all 50 states have their own laws on top of the ADA. Some of those laws are stronger than the ADA when it comes to protecting the rights of disabled people. Some are weaker. California has probably the strongest in the country, along with some others. The state laws deal with non-discrimination too. They deal with state money being spent. They deal with purchasing of technology in states. So if you're running an organization, you have to be aware of the laws in your particular state, but also the laws in the most advanced state, shall we say, because you're not going to have different policies. It's not cost effective to have different policies because one state might have less requirements, one state might have more. Really important to pay attention to the state laws, not just laws, legal theories. There's a lot of new attention being paid to what does it really mean when documents aren't accessible, or if you're a vendor and you're providing information that's not accessible, how can you is that an unfair business practice? Is it negligence? There's a lot of state laws that are coming into play in accessibility that are those apples in the apple pie that embody the civil rights laws, and that's what they're about. The Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, an international global standard that has a lot about digital accessibility, and there's increasing international laws for those of you who have organizations in Canada and the EU, the UK, and other places around the world. So I put that up there, and it goes with the civil rights, because I know sometimes the law can feel like a burden. It can feel like, oh, here's another requirement. But I like to think of those pictures of people with disabilities advocating to be part of our society. And that's what these laws are about. But the pie doesn't get baked unless there's ethical implementation. There's a close-up of a really nice lattice of an apple pie. And there's different ways to implement the laws and how they're being implemented today. Just really quick, there's 4 implementation strategies. And the first one are your customers and your champions. And I think it's really important to remember that when your customers call up and they say, I couldn't read this, I couldn't see this, I'm getting paper, but I can't access paper, I can't go to your website. Those are implementation strategies for civil rights laws. And I have a picture here, which I love, which is a cat, little kitty cat, looking in a mirror and seeing a lion. And the reason I put that here is because every organization sees themselves in a certain way. And when it comes to alternative formats and making sure your documents are accessible, I am sure that if you look within your organization's mottos or philosophies or credos, you will see that your organization wants to communicate with everyone. You might already have systems in place for providing information in other languages. So one of the tricks, if you're a champion within an organization really trying to push this issue, is fitting the idea of inclusion and effective communication into how your organization already sees itself. I learned this when I was doing negotiations with American Cancer Society. Like they said at the top, I am a disability rights lawyer. I advocate for accessibility through a process called structured negotiation, which is advocating without lawsuits. So I've been lucky since 1995 not to have to file but one lawsuit on all the issues I've worked with. And one of the reasons is because of this picture. Not that I send it out when I start negotiating with people, but for example, we work with American Cancer Society, which is a wonderful organization putting out great information in like 55 languages. But when we work with them, 10, 15 years ago now, they didn't have any of the information in accessible format. So we were able to say, hey, this isn't something off there, some ADA law that you have to meet. This is part of how you see yourselves. Organization that wants to be inclusive and provide information. Okay, so the other strategy, structured negotiation, like I say, this has been a collaborative strategy that the blind community has used for many, many years. I've written a book about it for those of you who are interested. It's called Structured Negotiation, a Winning Alternative to Lawsuits. We've worked on financial information, healthcare information. Before we were doing a lot of web work, we were doing work to make documents accessible, Braille, large print. So it's been a very effective strategy. The government agencies, of course, under the current administration, we don't have that much activity from government agencies, but that is a source. Department of Education is still very active in making sure that websites are accessible and documents for students. So nobody wants to have the federal government or the state government telling you how to run your business or your agency. So be proactive. Do accessibility, a good way to avoid this strategy coming down on you. And then, of course, lawsuits. So I want to devote the rest of our time to what's happening in the lawsuit space. Lawsuits. Okay, I'll just stop there and start telling you about them. So I have a picture here of pizza. Probably all of you on this call know that last year the U.S. Supreme Court considered whether it would take a case against Domino's Pizza for not having an accessible website and an accessible mobile app. The court decided not to hear it, which meant that the lower court, which in this case was the Ninth Circuit, the opinion of that court stood. And what the opinion of that court said was a case against Domino's Pizza for not having an accessible website can move forward. Between 2017 and 18, there were a lot of lawsuits around web accessibility for the first time. And sorry, I have to take a breath. There's so much information I want to share, and I want to try to get as much to you as I can. There was a huge number of lawsuits. Some of the arguments in those lawsuits were that, well, the ADA can't cover websites, or there's no particular regulations saying that the website has to meet the web content accessibility guidelines. And a lot of legal activity, huge amounts of money spent on that fight. Well, that fight is pretty much dead now that the US Supreme Court they didn't make a ruling. They said, we're not going to handle it. But by saying that, they let the Ninth Circuit case stand where the case can go forward. So we're not seeing as much anymore organizations trying to get cases thrown out under the ADA not applying. Because like I said earlier, since the beginning, the ADA has been about effective communication end, non-discrimination and participation, none of which you can have without accessibility. So where the Domino's case stands now is it went back to the lower court, which means that there's still things they can fight about, and they are not, it's not over yet. Maybe it will settle. Maybe there will be a trial about whether or not Domino's violated the ADA by not having an accessible website. Maybe it'll come out that the website was accessible. There'll be a lot of fighting, and in my view, a waste of money from a company that could have just made the site and made the mobile app accessible to start with. And that is the best way, of course, of avoiding being on this list next year, is to do it right. Is to do it right at the outset. Let me just say here that this is a legal update. We only have about 35 minutes total, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions. On my website, which is lflegal.com, there is a high-level navigation called Legal Update. And you can go back, I think I started it in about 2014, and you'll see other cases, links to court orders, press releases. So what I'm giving over here is just kind of currently what is happening. But if you really want to dive into how we got to where we are, you can look at that legal update section. Okay, shoppers. I have these slides, as you see, organized by the people who are bringing the cases. Because again, if you can think of accessibility in terms of the people, your customers, your clients, the public, your patients who are using the information, I think you'll have a greater motivation than thinking about it as a law. So 2 cases here now. There's a case pending against Walmart because their online shopping kiosks were not accessible. Again, security and privacy. Blind customers tried to use the self-check kiosks. They weren't able to. They asked for help from a Walmart employee, and instead of helping, that employee stole their money. And so this case really highlights the intersection between privacy, security, and accessibility. I have a link down here. It's a bit.ly/kiosks18. And in that post, I keep track of all the ways the law is looking at kiosks. So even though the summit is devoted to document accessibility, it's really important that accessibility be something you think of organizational wide, because while the bulk of the lawsuits are still about websites, more now about websites and mobile apps, there is legal activity around kiosks that you need to pay attention to. The other image up here is a bunch of gift cards. There were a lot of lawsuits filed for not having Braille on gift cards. I'm going to withhold my thoughts about that, but recently a judge said you can't, through a case out of court, there's many pending, this is just the first case, came out maybe within the last 3 months, that you can't file that lawsuit. If you read the court order, which will be up on my website, or you can check my Twitter, you can see that the judge was frustrated that one person filed like 75 cases, and that gets to the whole ethics issue that we'll talk about in a minute. It has nothing to do with providing Braille documents, providing large print or electronic accessibility information. So if you hear about it, don't say, oh, we don't have to do Braille. No, it was very, very particular to the question of Braille on gift cards. So I just want to bring that to your attention. Maybe could I have a time check from the moderators?
Yes, you have 30 minutes, actually, 25 minutes.
Okay, good. I can maybe take a breath or two. Okay, thank you. And I hope there'll be questions at the end too. So patience, again, this has always been an issue. I have worked on accessible documents with a company that formerly known as WellPoint. They were great partners in structured negotiation around their website and Braille and large print. That was like over 10 years ago. They became Anthem. Healthcare's so important, very important now. And so in terms of what's happening in the legal space, 2 things I want to bring to your attention. One, I put this picture of a billing statement up here. There is a case that was filed at the end of 2018 that, as far as I know, isn't finished yet. I always check in with the lawyers bringing these cases before I do the presentations. If anyone has more recent information than I have, please let me know. It was filed against the University of North Carolina Healthcare and Nash Healthcare on basic billing wasn't accessible. The information that is sent home with patients when they get released from a hospital that has, so much to do with staying safe and healthy in the future. No formats. Hard to believe this is still true in 2020 or 2018 when this case was filed. But yeah, so that case is pending. And then the other thing about information I wanted to show is this picture is of 2 pill bottles, both with a big white label that says RX, but there's no information on it. Because when you give a blind person medical information only in print, you're basically giving no information. And that's true across the sectors. It's really highlighted in healthcare because, you wouldn't want to bring home a prescription bottle, a prescription container with no information on it. But you wouldn't want to get a bill from your phone company with no information. You wouldn't want to go online for online dating and not be able to really access all the information you need. So there's been a lot of structured negotiation. I write about this in the book, and it's still ongoing with pharmacies who are doing a great job and wonderful partners and collaboration and having solutions, talking prescription labels, braille labels, and other kinds of healthcare information. So the healthcare information, I just think, especially today, is just so important. Okay, this picture is, this is about my favorite case, and it might be my favorite picture. So it's about campers. Like I said, I want to try to tie it to people. So when you're thinking, oh, do I have the budget for this, or should I do this? You are talking about real people that you are serving, whether is a decision point. Are they going to be excluded? Are they going to be included? Are you going to be on one side of civil rights law? Are you going to be on the other? So this is a case that was brought by an individual, and I think maybe an organization, I'm not sure, excuse me, against against a vendor who built a website for the state of California Parks Department. That's why it's campers. And this website cost $66 million. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. And the website was delivered, and the contract said this website should be accessible. It was all about reserving campgrounds and all this stuff about the Parks Department, what's available. It was delivered, it's supposed to be accessible. It wasn't accessible. And so the picture I have illustrating this is somebody holding up a bunch of $100 bills that are on fire, because this could so easily be avoided. I have an article about the lawsuit on my website, and I update it as new things develop. This was a lawsuit that was filed. The vendor, who's the web developer, whose name I'm actually forgetting right this second, a big company, they tried to get it thrown out of court, and it wasn't. And this is an example when I said at the front that there's different legal theories. This is a theory of False Claims Act, that you selling to the state government, you make a claim that it's accessible, but that claim is false. And so that's what's getting litigated here. And that is a theory. I believe this is the first case in the digital space on the question of false claims. The bit.ly link I have to find my post is bit.ly/66milweb, capital MIL, capital WEB. You can also go to my site, lflegal.com, and just search 66 million, and you can find it that way. So yeah, this raises the issue of accessible procurement, and I just had to make a whole slide that says accessible procurement helps avoid lawsuits. And there's a picture here of a resource that I helped work on with Disability In, which is a great nonprofit, business-to-business nonprofit focused on diversity and inclusion. And of course, we can't have diversity inclusion in the workplace without accessibility. So we put together this accessible procurement toolkit. And you can find it, I made a bit.ly link for it, bit.ly/DI, that's for disability in capital letters, DI Procure. And this is a very robust document with best practices, learnings from corporate partners of disability in, samples of what to write in your contract language, how to educate your vendors, how to test. I mean, how could this $66 million website be delivered without adequate testing before and during and throughout the procurement process? So if you want to avoid being in the slide deck for the next update as someone who got sued or someone who didn't pay attention to its people, then really take a look at your accessible procurement practices right from the beginning. What are your policies? Do you have a vendor? This is what happens when you're working at home with someone else who's working at home, distracted by their telephone call. So how to take a survey, make sure all your tools, I mean, this is geared particularly to employee tools, equally applicable to tools for your customers and your vendors too. So procurement, and we're going to really pay attention to what happens with that False Claims Act case. There's been more and more litigation around the employment space, and I predict there's going to be more as work has become more virtual. So when you're thinking of accessibility for your employees, don't forget applicants. There have been cases around the applicant portals. No one applies for a job with a paper application anymore. And if they do, if you have a paper system, you have to have an alternative system for people who can't use paper. Applicant portals, health benefit information. There's a lawsuit pending by a retiree who couldn't get his health insurance information or his benefit information. More and more people are looking at benefits. Another good resource I don't have up here on that same disabilityin.org website, they have a great series of COVID-19 responses. And I've helped out with the accessibility and remote work resource. And I really encourage you to look at that because there's a lot of good resources for how to make sure as employees are working at home, as retirees and applicants are relying more on digital, how to make sure that's all accessible. So these types of things are online assessments. They're already in a lawsuit somewhere. Employment software, job training software, interview software. I think the interview software, I just want to bring up another thing I haven't said yet, which is common sense. There's a lawsuit pending from the EEOC. There's a deaf woman. She applied for a job. She wanted to use a platform that made closed captioning easier for her, and the company chose a different platform when she specifically gave them the platform that would work for her for an interview. So don't get too caught up in sort of what your systems are. If someone makes a reasonable request, I mean, this whole issue of reasonable accommodation, which also impacts the need for accessibility. Many of these lawsuits, I look at them and I say, really, couldn't people have sat down and talked to each other? A lot of activity in the higher ed and K-12 space around accessibility, including document accessibility. Probably the most recent and the most important thing right now are the settlements from the National Association of the Deaf with Harvard and MIT. And I have a bit.ly up here, bit.ly/NAD and Harvard. This is a post on, I'm pretty sure it's on my website, and you can get the link to the settlement. And it's a really important sort of role-making settlement. It has to do with captioning of videos. Has a lot of good ideas for what to do with a big site and making it accessible. LA Community College had a lawsuit. Miami University has a really good settlement that I'll give you some resources for at the end. The Department of Education is still investigating complaints on accessible websites and other accessible documents. And again, education is online now. Education is virtual. I have two daughters. They're both public school teachers, and I see it firsthand. So the importance of educational materials in accessible format, never been more important. Citizens, a lot of voting cases. It was just a decision yesterday, I think, or the day before in Michigan, where I'm going to read this, Michigan election officials have agreed to allow blind voters to use software to complete an absentee ballot in local elections. So there's a lot of voting cases out there. There's a lot of cases being brought by deaf people who want access to public hearings that are streamed live. Well, now everything's streamed live. So some of these cases are kind of precursors to what we're going to see more of now that there's more virtual. Okay, movie lovers. I don't know how many, I almost took the slide out because I don't know how many of you run movie theaters, but I realized there was a bigger theme here, which is, this is a picture of an actual movie theater where, in the last 10, 12 years, I did a lot of work in structured negotiation. This is also in the book around audio description. So people who go to movies can get the content of the movies. Well, nobody, even before now, not as many people going to movies. Now nobody goes to movies because everything is streaming. And there's been a lot of great work by other lawyers in both litigation and structured negotiation using the law to make sure that there's audio description and screening. And I bring this up to say that whatever you're doing now for accessibility, it needs to carry as your companies innovate, as you go to the next type of document or the next type of delivery method. When we were working on audio description in theaters, we were not thinking about streaming. So whatever you're doing, this is why accessibility culture is so important in organizations, to make sure that whatever's next, accessibility isn't an add-on. Like we like to say, you can't put the blueberries into the muffin after it is baked. So that's why I left that in. Okay, investors and savers. All right, this is a picture that of a brochure that I have here in my office. Did you know that Bank of America's ATMs can talk? And it's in Braille. And this Bank of America, who has long been a champion of digital accessibility and document accessibility, was the very first organization to sign a web accessibility agreement in the United States. It was something I had the privilege of working on in structured negotiation. And that was in 2000. So if any of you work in companies where people say we don't know what to do, go back to Bank of America in 2000. I have an article about it. You can read the earlier settlements. There's a bit.ly link, B of A at 20. I did it this year for the 20th anniversary. Yet still, there are lawsuits about the financial space. What could be more accessibility tied into privacy and security than making sure financial documents are independently accessible? So this is a $2 million bill because just in the last year, there was a lawsuit against a finance organization, for $2 million. None of those cases are about $2 million, but it goes to show importance of staying ahead of the curve. So how can you stay ahead of the curve? Not by this. Can you hear the Jaws theme? Sometimes it plays, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah,
I hear
it's
it.
playing.
Okay. I am really opposed to fear as a motivator for accessibility. I don't think it works. I don't think that we like fear in any other aspect. We don't like it in our families. We don't use it to motivate our children. Well, we try not to, speaking as a mother of grown children. In our communities, in our neighborhoods, law shouldn't be about that. One of the reasons I like to do these talks is to try to convey some other idea of the law that is not that shark. Unfortunately, we have a situation in the United States where we have some lawyers who use the disability laws for reasons other than what they were intended for. And I have an article on my site, I don't know if I have the link here, yeah, bit.ly/LF ethics. And I talk about all the red flags. That's why I have a picture of red flags here. So you can see that, some of these lawsuits, are they really civil rights cases or are they something else? I have a whole presentation on that for another day. But the other picture on here is a woodcut of a woman throwing the baby out with the bathwater, an old-fashioned tub, and she's dumping it out. The water's coming out and so is the baby. We have to be so careful not to let the fact that we have a few lawyers who, in my view, are bad apples in this situation. We can't let that undermine the value of civil rights laws and the need to make sure people are included by having accessible documents and accessible digital properties. So how can you avoid it without the shark? You have to bake accessibility into your organization's culture. I have an article about this. It's bit.ly/access cookies. I have these yummy cookies in this picture that were actually baked for me when I did a talk in New Zealand. And they have a ton of ingredients, M&Ms and coconuts and this and that, to show two things. One, there's a lot of elements of baking accessibility in. There's procurement, there's design, there's development, transparency, training, but there's also a lot of roles. If you're in this room, you have a role in this cookie. And I like to say, yes, the law is a role. It's an ingredient, but it's kind of like the salt. Those of you who bake know you can't really get a sweet cookie unless you put a little bit of salt. But if you have too much salt, it's a very bad cookie. So for that, I have a post. I have it here, bit.ly 65%, or you can just put 65% in the search engine. And that's because someone once asked me a question in a talk like this: our captions are 65% accurate. Do you think that complies with the ADA? And the person was very well meaning. But that's what happens when you have too much of a legal frame and you're thinking of everything like, who wants to read a book with 35% of the content missing? You don't. So also transparency. I have another post where I keep track of accessibility statements from organizations. If you're on this call and you're not listed in that post and you want to be, please send me an email. You can find it at LF Legal State, or you can look up accessibility statements and you can find it there. So I invite you to research more about the cookie. I do whole talks just with this slide on the cookies, but that's how you do it. You don't, the shark is not going to do it for us. So how can you keep up with what's happening? A few resources: the Web Accessibility Initiative, fantastic. They're the people who do the WCAG standards. Great information on there. They have an accessibility statement generator where you plug in your information. It gives you an accessibility statement. They have free educational resources, underutilized, underappreciated. w3.org/way. The ADA Title3.com blog from Seyfarth Shah is they do a good job on the numbers, how many lawsuits, they keep up with the cases. They have a team instead of I just have myself. So they're often ahead of me in terms of what they put up there. So I recommend it. For higher ed, there's a great University of Minnesota resource that you can find. I made a bit.ly at Higher Ed Law, where Laura Carlson keeps up with what's happening in the legal space on digital and higher ed. Allie Twitter, I already told you about. There's great conferences such as this one we're in today. Next week is Access U from Nobility. It's virtual this year. I've spoken at that conference for many years in Austin. Really encourage, if you haven't ever been or you've never heard of it, Access U. It's put on by Nobility. That's KNOW. It's a really great conference with technical tracks and policy tracks. My website, I try to keep up best I can, lflegal.com. And accessibility in the news from MicroAssist is another place I get a lot of information. So that's what I have. I'm happy to take any questions. I have up here, again, my website, lflegal.com, and my Twitter, and my dolphin, because instead of being a shark, I try to be a dolphin. Dolphins are great communicators. Dolphins are great collaborators. When I do live presentations, I have dolphin stickers and a lot of dolphin swag. And I've written about this, so I encourage you to just think in your own minds, you know, what's going to motivate your teams and your organizations, your executives to really bake accessibility into your culture. So thank you for having me, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Lainey. There are a couple of questions, and we do have about 10 minutes. So the first question is there anything we can do when our legal department says not to post any accessibility statements because they're afraid we'll get sued for not doing enough if we do?
Yeah, that's a good question. When sometimes when I do an in-person thing or people can raise their hands, I'm like, how many people are kind of see their legal department as a supporter, and how many see their legal department as a roadblock? And fortunately, many legal departments are fantastic. A lot of accessibility work is done out of legal departments. I don't want to make any blanket statement about legal departments. However, There are some people who think that transparency is not good. For those people, that's one reason I do that accessibility statement page, where you can see so many companies putting up accessibility statements. And just a shout out to Microsoft, who is, of course, a leader in this space. They have so much accessibility information on their website. And you know what? For the lawyers who are the red flag lawyers, they're not going to care if you have a statement or you don't have a statement. But for people who really want access to your site, I get a lot of calls from blind people. And the first thing about sites, and the first thing I do is go to a site and say, oh, do they have an accessibility information page? Do they have an accessibility statement? And if they do, I know, well, someone in this company knows what this is about. Let's find that person and let's get this thing fixed. Because, you know, the word roadmap is thrown around, but it's so important in this space because we can't do everything all at once. We can't fix everything tomorrow. So having a clear statement is, in my view, going to help avoid litigation by lawyers and clients who are really out to improve accessibility. So that's what I say. And you can have your legal departments call me. Maybe I'll try to talk them into it.
Great, thank you so much. The next one is, if we can't make our documents accessible, should we just take them off our website? Wouldn't that be the easiest?
Well, hopefully everyone that's listening is shaking their head, no, don't do that. First of all, it's not necessary because, again, there's the roadmap, there is having a system in place, and most importantly, again, this is transparency. Every page that hasn't been remediated yet needs to have a very clear way of a customer or a citizen, public, member, whatever, being able to request a one-off until you have the full accessibility on your roadmap. So it's never, we don't want accessibility, again, to be seen as like a fear thing, a burden thing. Oh my God, we're going to take these off. Everyone benefits from the documents you have. Although having a website, I will say, sometimes I go through the website and say, do I really need this thing on here? So I'm not here to say that you need to go and like, don't take anything off your website, but don't take it off for the reason of accessibility. Perhaps something's old, perhaps something's not current, perhaps you don't want it anymore. Have a nice, clean, good website, but definitely don't take things off to satisfy some idea of the law as a hammer.
Good, thank you very much. And the next question, we're a small business and it will kill us if we have to go back and make everything on our website accessible and fix all of our PDFs. Do we have to?
Well, kind of like no one wants accessibility or civil rights or an inclusion to kill off any small business. We all need small businesses, and a lot of small business, people with disabilities own small businesses. The ADA is a flexible statute. It's 30 years old. It wouldn't have survived this long or been signed into law by a Republican president if it didn't have flexibility. So there is not a requirement to do anything that is an undue burden, which has to do with the overall costs and expenses based on the size of your organization. Again, it's really important not to try to throw the blueberries in after the muffin is baked. You need to have a plan. You need to have a roadmap. You need to have something that makes sense. What does your homepage look like? What are your most visited pages? Do you have documents on there that you get very few requests for? Do you have a system in place to remediate a document on very short notice if you get a request for it? So yes, everything on your site, all your documents should be accessible, but having flexibility in terms of the roadmap as well as a way that people can request and you can turn around a one-off, I think is really the key.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lainey. We are out of time. And so I really appreciate it. This is a wonderful presentation. I love your analogies, by the way. So appreciate it. It was great information.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. Enjoy the rest of your time.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next up we have Scott and Dennis, who will be here shortly.